"You're too old and too poor to be working here, you worthless black maid." These shocking words exploded from the mouth of billionaire CEO Alexander Blackstone in a corporate hallway, captured on security cameras for the entire world to see. What happened next would cost him $7 billion and destroy everything he had ever built. But the most shocking part? The judge who would decide his fate had a connection to his victim that nobody could have predicted. What happens when a billionaire CEO decides that a hardworking janitor doesn't deserve basic human dignity? What happens when that same billionaire discovers that his moment of cruelty was captured on camera and will be judged by someone who has every reason to make him pay? This is the incredible true story of how 4 cruel sentences spoken in a moment of arrogance became the most expensive words ever uttered in corporate history. You are about to witness one of the most devastating cases of instant karma ever recorded, where wealth and privilege collide with justice in ways that will leave you speechless. This isn't just another feel-good story about good triumphing over evil. This is a real account of how a single moment of racism and arrogance cost one man his entire empire and taught him the most expensive lesson in human decency ever delivered. The janitor he humiliated had a secret that would change everything. The judge who would decide his fate had a connection to the case that nobody could have predicted. And when those two worlds collided in a courtroom, the scales of justice didn't just balance, they completely obliterated the life of a man who thought his money made him untouchable. Get ready for a story that will restore your faith in justice, challenge everything you think you know about power, and prove that sometimes the universe has a way of making things right in the most unexpected ways. But I have to warn you, the ending will shock you in ways you never saw coming, and you'll never look at workplace bullying the same way again. The marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Alexander Blackstone straightened his $1,000 tie. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the polished surface with the rhythm of a man who owned everything he touched. The scent of expensive cologne mixed with fresh lilies filled the air of the towering Meridian Industries headquarters. This billionaire CEO had built an empire worth $7 billion, and today's board meeting would secure his legacy forever. But something was slowing him down. Someone was in his way. An elderly black woman moved her mop across the pristine floor with careful, deliberate strokes. Her weathered hands gripped the handle as she worked methodically, section by section. The fluorescent lights caught the silver streaks in her neatly tied hair. Her uniform, though clean and pressed, showed the wear of countless washing cycles. Alexander checked his diamond-encrusted watch and felt his jaw tighten. The board members were already gathered in the conference room on the 40th floor. His presentation would determine whether Meridian Industries would acquire the largest construction contract in the city's history. Every second counted, and this woman was creating an obstacle he couldn't afford. The sound of her mop swishing against the floor seemed to echo louder than it should. He tried to step around her, but she was taking up too much space in the narrow hallway. His patience, already thin from the morning's traffic, began to evaporate completely. The woman hadn't even looked up to acknowledge his presence. Didn't she know who he was? Didn't she understand that some people were more important than others in this building? The irony was lost on him that this same hallway had witnessed his rise to power. 10 years ago, he had walked these floors as a young executive, hungry and determined. Now, as one of the richest men in the country, he had forgotten what it felt like to struggle for every dollar. His success had created a wall between him and the world of ordinary people. Other employees began to notice the tension building in the hallway. Secretaries paused their conversations. Junior executives slowed their pace to observe what would happen next. The air grew thick with anticipation. Alexander Blackstone was known for his explosive temper, and everyone could sense something was about to break. The woman continued mopping, unaware that she had become the center of unwanted attention. What none of them knew was that this moment would cost him everything he had ever built. The empire, the reputation, the billions, it would all come crashing down because of what he was about to do. But Alexander couldn't see beyond his own impatience and arrogance. He was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and there would be no taking it back. "Excuse me." Alexander's voice cut through the morning quiet like a knife through silk. His words echoed off the polished walls, causing several employees to freeze in their tracks. The elderly woman looked up slowly, her deep brown eyes meeting his cold blue stare. She could see the irritation written across his pale features, the way his jaw clenched with barely contained frustration. Her heart began to race, but she kept her expression calm and respectful. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent apologizing for simply existing in spaces where others felt she didn't belong. She began to move her cleaning cart to the side, her arthritic hands struggling with the weight. The wheels squeaked against the marble floor, creating an uncomfortable soundtrack to the growing tension. Alexander watched her slow movements with visible impatience, his foot tapping an aggressive rhythm against the ground. The woman's name was Dorothy Washington, though no one in the building had ever bothered to learn it. She had been cleaning these halls for 15 years, arriving before dawn and leaving long after the sun set. Her back ached constantly from bending over mops and scrubbing brushes, but she never complained. The pain had become as familiar as her own reflection, a constant companion in her daily struggle to provide for herself. "You're blocking the entire hallway," Alexander snapped, his voice rising another octave. He gestured dramatically with his manicured hands, as if conducting an orchestra of indignation. "Some of us have important business to attend to. Some of us actually matter in this building." His words hung in the air like poison, seeping into the consciousness of everyone within earshot. Dorothy felt each syllable like a physical blow, but she had learned long ago to absorb such cruelty without showing the damage it caused. Behind him, other executives began to gather, drawn by the commotion like vultures to carrion. They whispered among themselves, some looking uncomfortable, others seeming almost entertained by the spectacle. Alexander felt emboldened by his audience, his chest puffing out with false righteousness. He had forgotten the basic humanity that once guided his actions, replaced now by the intoxicating belief that money made him superior to those who served him. Dorothy moved faster now, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to clear the path. She could feel the eyes of the crowd burning into her back, could hear the whispers and murmurs of judgment. This wasn't the first time she had been humiliated at work, but something about today felt different, more dangerous. The air itself seemed to crackle with malicious energy, as if the universe was preparing for something terrible to unfold. But Alexander wasn't finished. His irritation was growing into something darker, something that would soon explode into a moment that would destroy everything he had worked to build. He stepped closer to Dorothy, his shadow falling across her bent form like a dark omen. What he was about to do would echo through courtrooms and boardrooms, would cost him billions, and would teach him the most expensive lesson of his privileged life. Alexander's face flushed red as his patience finally snapped completely. The marble hallway had become an arena, and he was about to put on a performance that would haunt him forever. His voice boomed through the space, carrying the full weight of his arrogance and contempt. "You know what? I've had enough of this nonsense." Every word dripped with venom, each syllable designed to cut as deeply as possible into the woman's dignity. He pointed his finger directly at Dorothy's face, close enough that she could smell the expensive coffee on his breath. The gold ring on his finger caught the light, gleaming like a weapon in the fluorescent glare. "You're too old and too poor to be working here, you worthless black maid." The words exploded from his mouth like bullets, finding their target with devastating precision. The entire hallway fell silent except for the humming of the air conditioning and the distant sound of elevators moving between floors. Dorothy's hands froze on the mop handle, her knuckles turning ashen as she gripped it like an anchor in a storm. Her eyes filled with tears that she refused to let fall, years of practiced dignity holding them back like a dam under pressure. She had faced discrimination before, had endured countless microaggressions and casual cruelty, but this felt different. This was a public execution of her worth as a human being, performed for an audience of strangers. The crowd around them had grown larger, drawn by the commotion like witnesses to a car accident. Junior executives held their breath, secretaries covered their mouths in shock, and even the security guards seemed frozen in place. Nobody moved to help, nobody spoke in her defense. The silence was deafening, a collective complicity in her humiliation. Their inaction spoke louder than Alexander's words, confirming that in this world of wealth and power, she was truly alone. Alexander felt intoxicated by his own cruelty, feeding off the shocked faces around him like a vampire drawing sustenance from pain. He had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, had revealed the darkness that lived beneath his expensive suits and charitable donations. The man who attended fundraisers and posed for magazine covers had shown his true face, and it was uglier than anyone could have imagined. Stories like this need to be told, because they reveal the truth about power and privilege in our world. Subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter of this incredible journey. Dorothy stood there, absorbing every ounce of hatred he poured onto her, but what Alexander didn't know was that she wasn't as powerless as he believed. Her strength came from places he couldn't understand, from roots that ran deeper than his shallow cruelty could reach. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry wasps, and somewhere in the distance, the elevator chimed as it reached another floor. But in that hallway, time seemed to stand still, frozen in a moment that would reshape the lives of everyone present. Alexander had just lit a fuse that would eventually burn down everything he held dear, but he was too drunk on his own power to see the explosion coming. What the crowd couldn't see were the tears Dorothy fought back every morning when she woke up to another day of pain. Her lower back screamed with each movement, a symphony of suffering that had been building for decades. 3 herniated discs pressed against her spine like tiny daggers, the result of countless hours bent over cleaning supplies, lifting heavy buckets, and scrubbing floors on her hands and knees. The doctor had told her 2 years ago that she needed surgery, but the cost was beyond her reach. She took 4 ibuprofen pills every morning just to walk upright, washing them down with coffee so bitter it matched her daily reality. The medication barely touched the pain anymore, but it was all she could afford. Her arthritis had spread from her hands to her shoulders, making every grip of the mop handle feel like holding fire. Yet she never missed a day of work, never complained to her supervisors, never let anyone see how much she was sacrificing just to survive. Dorothy's small apartment in the city's east side was a testament to her resilience and sacrifice. The walls were covered with photographs of her greatest achievement, her son Marcus, who had just graduated law school and passed the bar exam 6 months ago. His graduation photo sat prominently on her dresser, next to his first legal brief and a newspaper clipping about his internship at the county courthouse. She had worked 3 jobs to put him through school, and now he was finally starting his career as a junior clerk. But Marcus was still paying off his student loans, still building his reputation, still earning the modest salary that came with being the newest face in the courthouse. He sent her what he could each month, but it wasn't enough for her to retire. He had begged her to quit working, promising that soon he would be able to support her completely, but Dorothy knew that soon was still years away. She couldn't burden him with her financial needs when he was just starting to build his own life. The irony was heartbreaking. She had sacrificed everything to give her son the education and opportunities she never had, but now her body was paying the ultimate price. Each night, she soaked in a bathtub filled with Epsom salt, trying to dissolve the pain that had become her constant companion. She prayed for strength to make it through one more day, one more week, one more month until Marcus could establish himself enough to help her properly. Her co-workers at Meridian Industries had no idea about her struggles. They saw only the quiet woman who arrived before them and left after them, who cleaned their messes without complaint and smiled politely when they barely acknowledged her existence. They didn't know about the heating pads she used every night, the physical therapy exercises she did in her living room, or the dream she had of finally resting after a lifetime of backbreaking labor. As Alexander's cruel words echoed in her ears, Dorothy thought about Marcus and wondered if he would be proud of how she handled this moment. She had taught him to stand up for justice, to fight for what was right, to never let anyone diminish his worth because of his skin color. But now, standing in that hallway surrounded by hostile faces, she felt smaller than she had in years, wondering if all her sacrifices had been worth the pain she was enduring. Marcus Washington sat in his small office at the county courthouse, reviewing case files with the intensity of someone who understood that every detail mattered. At 28 years old, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had earned everything through hard work and sacrifice. His law degree hung proudly on the wall behind his desk, next to a photo of his mother at his graduation ceremony. Her smile in that picture was the brightest thing in the room, radiating the joy of a woman who had seen her greatest dream come true. He had been appointed as a junior judge just 3 weeks ago, the youngest in the county's history. The position came with tremendous responsibility and a salary that finally allowed him to breathe financially. His first paycheck sat framed on his bookshelf, not because of the amount, but because it represented the first step toward being able to care for his mother the way she had always cared for him. He had already started looking for a small house where she could retire comfortably, somewhere with a garden where she could finally rest her weary hands. The memory of her sacrifices was burned into his consciousness like a sacred text. He remembered the sound of her leaving for work before sunrise, the way she would come home with her back bent from exhaustion, the countless times she went without new clothes or meals so he could have textbooks and school supplies. She had worked as a seamstress, a house cleaner, and finally as a janitor at Meridian Industries, each job a stepping stone toward his education. Marcus had spent countless nights studying by lamplight while his mother soaked her aching feet in warm water nearby. She would quiz him on constitutional law while folding laundry, help him practice oral arguments while preparing their simple dinners. Her intelligence had been wasted by a system that never gave her the opportunities she deserved, but she had poured all of her unrealized potential into him like water into fertile soil. Now, as he prepared for his first major case, Marcus felt the weight of her dreams on his shoulders. The case involved a discrimination lawsuit against one of the city's largest corporations, a situation that hit close to home given his mother's experiences with workplace prejudice. He had seen her come home with stories of casual cruelty, of being overlooked for promotions, of being treated as invisible by people who couldn't see her worth. What Marcus didn't know was that at this very moment, his mother was standing in a hallway at Meridian Industries, absorbing the cruelest words she had ever heard directed at her. He was reviewing legal briefs while she was being publicly humiliated by a man who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to his important day. The universe was already weaving the threads that would bring them together in that courtroom, but neither of them could see the pattern yet. If Marcus had been there in that hallway, if he had witnessed Alexander's vicious attack on his mother's dignity, the story might have ended very differently. But sometimes justice takes a longer path, winding through unexpected corridors before finding its way to the truth. The same system that had denied his mother opportunities was about to give her son the power to balance the scales, and when that moment came, the weight of every sacrifice she had made would finally find its purpose. Dorothy's fingers tightened around the mop handle until her knuckles turned white, the plastic cutting into her palms like tiny knives. The hallway had become a cathedral of cruelty, with Alexander's words still echoing off the marble walls like a prayer to hatred. She could feel the stares of dozens of employees boring into her skin, their silence more devastating than any words they could have spoken. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to highlight every line of pain etched into her weathered face. She began, her voice barely above a whisper, then stopped. What could she say? What words existed that could restore her dignity in this moment? Her throat felt tight, constricted by the weight of decades of similar humiliations. She had faced discrimination before, but never so publicly, never with such vicious intent. The crowd around her seemed to pulse with uncomfortable energy, some people looking away in shame, others watching with the morbid fascination of witnesses to a public execution. Alexander stood there basking in his moment of cruelty, his chest puffed out with false righteousness. He had reduced a human being to tears in front of an audience, and the power rush was intoxicating. He smoothed his tie and checked his watch again, as if the destruction of someone's dignity was just another item to check off his busy schedule. The scent of his expensive cologne mixed with the cleaning supplies Dorothy had been using, creating a nauseating cocktail that seemed to symbolize the collision between wealth and poverty. Behind Dorothy, a young secretary named Sarah felt tears welling up in her own eyes. She wanted to speak up, wanted to defend this woman who had always smiled and said good morning when they passed in the halls. But Sarah's job was too important, her own bills too pressing. She looked down at her shoes, adding her silence to the collective cowardice that allowed men like Alexander to terrorize those beneath them. The weight of her inaction would haunt her for years to come. Dorothy thought about her son Marcus, about the pride in his eyes when he told her about his new position as a judge. She had raised him to stand up for justice, to fight against exactly this kind of cruelty. But now, standing here in her uniform with cleaning supplies scattered around her feet, she felt like a failure. How could she have taught him about dignity when she couldn't even protect her own? The irony was devastating. She had sacrificed everything to give him the tools to fight injustice, but she was powerless to defend herself. The silence stretched on like a physical thing, heavy and suffocating. Someone coughed. A cell phone buzzed. The elevator chimed as it reached another floor. But nobody moved to help Dorothy, nobody challenged Alexander's cruelty. Their inaction was a vote, a collective decision that her pain didn't matter enough to risk their own comfort. She understood then that she was truly alone, surrounded by people but isolated by the invisible barriers of class and race. What none of them knew was that this moment was being recorded by the building's security cameras, that every cruel word and silent witness was being captured in high definition. The footage would soon find its way to social media, to news outlets, to the desk of a young judge who would recognize the woman being humiliated as the hero who had sacrificed everything for his success. Justice was coming, but it would arrive in a courtroom, not in a hallway. 3 weeks later, the morning sun streamed through the tall windows of courtroom 7, casting golden rectangles across the polished wood floors. Marcus Washington adjusted his black robes with hands that trembled slightly from both nervousness and anticipation. Today marked his most significant case yet. Meridian Industries was being sued for workplace discrimination by 15 former employees. The irony wasn't lost on him that his mother still worked for the same company, though he had no idea what had transpired in that hallway weeks earlier. The plaintiff's attorney was reviewing her notes when Alexander Blackstone entered the courtroom like a king arriving at court. His legal team followed behind him, a parade of expensive suits and leather briefcases that cost more than most people made in a month. Alexander's confidence was unshakable. He had weathered legal challenges before, had armies of lawyers whose job it was to make problems disappear. He took his seat at the defendant's table and straightened his platinum cufflinks, a man who had never lost anything that mattered. Marcus took his place behind the bench, his heart racing as he surveyed the packed courtroom. This was the moment he had dreamed of since law school, the chance to make decisions that could change lives and correct injustices. He thought about his mother, about the stories she had told him of workplace cruelty, about the dignity she maintained despite being treated as invisible. Every sacrifice she had made had led to this moment, though neither of them knew it yet. As the morning session began, Marcus noticed a familiar figure in the gallery. His mother sat in the back row, her hands folded in her lap, her uniform replaced by her best church dress. She had taken the day off work to watch her son preside over his first major case, her pride evident in the way she sat perfectly straight despite the pain in her back. The sight of her filled Marcus with determination. He would honor her sacrifices with the integrity of his decisions. Alexander's lawyers presented their case with the cold efficiency of machines designed to grind down opposition. They painted the discrimination claims as attempts by disgruntled employees to profit from a successful company. Their arguments were polished, their evidence carefully curated, their strategy designed to overwhelm rather than illuminate. Alexander watched with smug satisfaction, confident that money and influence would prevail as they always had. But something in Judge Washington's eyes should have warned him. There was a steel there, a resolve that came from understanding injustice intimately. Marcus listened to each argument with the intensity of someone who knew that courtrooms were where the scales of justice could finally be balanced. He thought about every story his mother had told him about workplace discrimination, every night she had come home exhausted from being treated as less than human. When the session broke for lunch, Marcus noticed his mother approaching the bench. She moved slowly, her back obviously bothering her, but her smile was radiant. "I'm so proud of you, baby," she whispered, reaching up to touch his hand. What she didn't say, what she would never burden him with, was that the defendant sitting just a few feet away had recently destroyed her dignity in front of a crowd of witnesses. That revelation was still coming, and when it arrived, it would change everything. Topic 8, the turning point. The afternoon session resumed with the plaintiff's attorney calling her final witness, a security guard named James who had worked at Meridian Industries for over a decade. His hands shook as he approached the witness stand, clearly uncomfortable with being the center of attention in such a formal setting. He had requested to remain anonymous, but his conscience wouldn't allow him to stay silent any longer. What he was about to reveal would shift the entire case from corporate discrimination to personal accountability. "Your Honor," the attorney began, "this witness has evidence that directly relates to the character and behavior of the defendant company's leadership." James reached into his jacket and pulled out a USB drive, his fingers trembling as he held it up for the court to see. The small device contained security footage that would expose Alexander Blackstone's true nature, footage that had been eating at James's conscience for 3 weeks. He couldn't sleep knowing that such cruelty had gone unpunished. Marcus authorized the presentation of the evidence, and the courtroom's attention turned to the large screen that had been set up for visual exhibits. The timestamp showed the date and time clearly: 3 weeks ago, 8:47 a.m., Meridian Industries headquarters. The black and white footage was crystal clear, capturing every detail of that morning's encounter. Alexander shifted uncomfortably in his seat, a cold dread beginning to creep up his spine as he recognized the familiar hallway. The courtroom fell silent as Dorothy appeared on screen, her methodical movements with the mop exactly as Marcus remembered her working at home when he was young. She looked so small on the screen, so vulnerable as she tried to do her job with dignity despite her obvious physical pain. Alexander's voice came through the speakers with devastating clarity: "You're too old and too poor to be working here, you worthless black maid." The words hit the courtroom like physical blows. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as he recognized his mother on the screen. The woman he loved more than life itself was being humiliated by the man sitting just feet away from him. His hands gripped the bench until his knuckles turned white, his judicial composure warring with a son's rage. The room seemed to spin as he watched his mother absorb every cruel word, her dignity intact even as her heart was being shattered. This was why she had seemed so sad lately, why her smiles hadn't reached her eyes. The footage continued, showing the crowd of witnesses who did nothing, the cruel satisfaction on Alexander's face, the way Dorothy's hands shook as she gripped her mop handle. Every second was agony for Marcus, watching his hero being torn down by a man who saw her as nothing more than an obstacle to his important day. The same woman who had worked 3 jobs to put him through school, who had sacrificed her health so he could have opportunities, was being treated like trash by a billionaire who had never struggled for anything. You won't believe what happens next in this incredible story of justice and redemption. Subscribe now to see how a mother's love and a son's determination changed everything. Alexander realized too late that his moment of cruelty was about to cost him everything, but the wheels of justice were already turning. The case that had seemed like a minor inconvenience was about to become the most expensive lesson of his privileged life, and the judge looking down at him with burning eyes held the power to strip away everything he had built. Marcus called for a brief recess, his voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside him. He retreated to his chambers, needing a moment to compose himself before delivering what would become the most important decision of his career. The footage played over and over in his mind, each viewing more devastating than the last. His mother, his hero, had been publicly humiliated by the man whose fate now rested in his hands. The universe had delivered Alexander Blackstone directly to the son of the woman he had tormented. When court reconvened, the tension in the room was palpable. Alexander's lawyers had grown nervous during the recess, whispering frantically among themselves as they realized their client's public display of racism had been captured in high definition. Dorothy sat in the gallery, unaware that her son had seen the footage, unaware that justice was finally about to find its voice. Her hands were folded in her lap, the same position Marcus had seen her in countless times when she was tired but trying to stay strong. Marcus returned to the bench with the bearing of a man who had found his purpose. His voice carried the weight of every sacrifice his mother had made, every night she had worked late so he could study, every dollar she had saved for his education. Having reviewed all evidence presented in this case, he began, his words echoing through the silent courtroom like thunder. This court finds the defendant's behavior to be not only discriminatory but emblematic of a culture of racial hostility that pervades Meridian Industries. Alexander's face went pale as he realized the implications of the judge's words. This was supposed to be a routine corporate lawsuit, easily dismissed with the right legal maneuvering and financial settlements. Instead, he was facing a judge whose eyes burned with righteous anger, whose every word seemed designed to strip away his carefully constructed facade of respectability. The comfortable world of wealth and privilege that had always protected him was crumbling beneath his feet. Therefore, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, this court awards damages in the amount of $7 billion to be distributed among the plaintiffs and establishes a fund for workplace discrimination victims. The number hit Alexander like a physical blow, representing not just his entire net worth but the complete destruction of his empire. Meridian Industries would be bankrupt within weeks, its assets liquidated to pay for decades of institutional racism and cruelty. The courtroom erupted in gasps and whispers, but Marcus wasn't finished. Furthermore, he declared, his eyes locked on Alexander's horrified face, this court recommends criminal charges be filed for harassment and creating a hostile work environment. Alexander slumped in his chair, the reality of his situation finally penetrating his arrogant facade. The man who had humiliated a janitor 3 weeks ago was about to lose everything he had ever built. Dorothy watched from the gallery as her son delivered justice with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a warrior for righteousness. She didn't yet understand that this moment was personal, that the case was connected to her own humiliation. But she felt a deep pride watching Marcus stand up for workers like herself, using the education she had sacrificed everything to provide. As Alexander was led away by court officers, his empire in ruins, Dorothy Washington smiled with the quiet satisfaction of a mother who had raised her son right. Justice had finally arrived, delivered by the hands she had held through homework and heartbreak, spoken by the voice she had taught to never accept injustice. The price of arrogance had been paid in full,